Welcome everybody. My name is Tina Lopez. So this is going to be an introduction to deaf and hard of hearing children. So I'll go over the agenda for today and what we'll be learning about today. But this is the ins and outs of hearing loss and the needs of deaf and hard of hearing students in the education system and at home. There it goes. So my name is Tina Lopez. I am a deaf and hard of hearing itinerant teacher. So an itinerant teacher is a teacher that moves around. So I've been doing this job for, I think, the past 5 years now. So I work for 3 different schools. Oh, now I can hear myself. There we go. I work for 3 different school districts, and I mainly work with students who have a hearing loss, but they also are mainstreamed into the general education classroom. And then I also work with students who have multiple disabilities, and one of their disabilities is hearing loss. And so I also work with children who are in mild to moderate programs or moderate to severe programs, special day class programs. So I go into the classroom and work, or I used to go into the classroom and work with the students, and I work with the teachers and the paraprofessionals who work with them. So I've been doing this for 13 years now. My first experience was working with high schoolers. I taught English to deaf and hard of hearing kids at the high school level. And then I used to work in the Early Start program up in Concord in Mount Diablo Unified School District. And I did that for a couple years. And then I also worked at the preschool level for a couple years. But I've had experience with middle school, elementary school through my college experience. And I graduated with my bachelor's and my master's degree at California State University, Fresno, a long time ago. So that's kind of a little bit about my experience. So for today, by the end of this, we will be talking about deafness and the different terms used for people with hearing loss. What is an IEP? It's an individualized education plan. Sometimes it's called an individualized education program. And what accommodations students with hearing loss may require in the classroom. Then we'll also be talking a little bit about amplification and the hearing assistive technology used by deaf and hard of hearing kids. And then we'll be talking a little bit about behaviors children exhibit that may be impacted by hearing loss, about possible additional disabilities. And then also we'll be talking a little bit about play-based activities that parents can do with their deaf and hard of hearing child. So those are kind of the points that we're going to be talking about today. So what do the terms deaf and hard of hearing mean? So there are, sorry, I can't move this thing. So, so deaf and hard of hearing terminology. So there's 2 terms that we technically talk labels children with hearing loss. So there's deaf, and then there's a deaf with a big D and a deaf with a little d, and then there's hard of hearing. There is a clinical, more medical, different levels of hearing loss. I'm not going to go over that so much, but there are technically, when we're talking about a child with hearing loss, we usually call them deaf or hard of hearing. So within the deaf component, there are 2 different. So there's also a cultural component. So there is a deaf culture that many people are part of. And so if they are part of that deaf culture, then they consider themselves deaf with a capital D. Then people who consider themselves, they have a medical diagnosis of a hearing loss, but they don't really consider themselves part of the deaf culture, then they will call themselves deaf with a lowercase d. And then deaf people, whether they're part of the deaf culture or they're not part of the deaf culture, they can use amplification such as hearing aids or cochlear implants. So it doesn't matter if they're part of the culture or not. And then hard of hearing is another category that we use. So people with hearing loss may consider themselves as hard of hearing. And then they also may use amplification to access sound, hearing aids or cochlear implants. And then hard of hearing people can also consider themselves part of deaf culture. So they don't have to call themselves deaf in order to be part of deaf culture. They can also call themselves hard of hearing. So like I said, there is a medical level, like there's different levels of hearing loss, but usually the person will kind of decide whether they like to be called deaf or hard of hearing. Usually we call people who are hard of hearing, usually the ones that are, a lot of the times they use hearing aids, they use cochlear implants. Sometimes they are able to use speech and language a little bit more. And then there's also a lot of the times if people are deaf, they use more sign language to communicate, but that's not always the case. So there's certain terms that are no longer used and we shouldn't be using anymore. The last two, deaf and dumb and deaf mute, those are rather old terms. So a lot of people don't use those anymore. But hearing impaired is one that I still hear on a regular basis. So that definitely is a term that we need to try to get used to not saying anymore. Because there is that cultural component. A lot of time the community doesn't believe that they're impaired in any way. And so instead of saying someone has an impairment, they prefer to say if they are deaf or hard of hearing. And then I have to move my window. I'm sorry, I apologize. Okay, so there's different communication modalities. They can range from spoken language to a sign-based language. And then a lot of times the individuals with the hearing loss will determine what communication modality works best for them. And then oftentimes it's a family decision when it comes to having a child with a hearing loss and what communication modality is used. So a lot of times kids will, if they're born with a hearing loss, then the family usually is a big part of deciding what communication modality is used. And then as the child grows up and they become older, and then a lot of times the child themselves will decide what kind of communication modality is most comfortable for them and what works best for them. So then they will usually use that by the time they're an adult.
Oh, Miss Tina, I have a question. Yes. Can you explain what modality means?
Yes, so communication modality is the way that the child communicates. So I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. I apologize. I'm having a hard time not seeing myself. Oops. There we go. There we go. Let's try that. Okay, so modality is just which avenue a child takes to communicate with the world. So there's spoken language. So a child could, if they have a hearing loss and they're wearing hearing aids, a cochlear implant, sometimes if they have a unilateral hearing loss, so they just have a hearing loss in one ear, sometimes spoken language is the modality or the way that they communicate. If a child, sometimes they have a more severe hearing loss, or they could not have a more severe hearing loss, and they prefer to use a more sign language based, like American Sign Language. There's Signed Exact English. There's different kinds of sign languages. Signed Exact English isn't a language in itself, but it is a visual representation of English. A lot of students, so a lot of programs sometimes use that still. So the modality is just the way that that child communicates and what they prefer to use and what works best for them. So a lot of programs are called total communication programs, and that just means that that program will use the communication modality or the way that the way that that child communicates in order to, we want to use whatever communication works best for that child and develop that way. Okay. So IEPs and accommodations. Okay, so an IEP is called an Individualized Education Program or Plan. So this is a written document that's developed for each public school child who is eligible for special education. And then the IEP is created through a team effort, and it's reviewed at least once a year. And then at the beginning of a child, in order for a child to have an IEP, there first has to be a referral process. So a child is referred, and then there is usually an assessment plan. So a child has to be formally assessed before an IEP can be developed. So before an IEP can be written, they must be eligible for special education services. And then a multidisciplinary team has to determine if that child has a disability and if they require services in order for them to be successful in a general education program or in any program that best fits them. So in order for that to happen, so if we're talking about a child with a hearing loss, they already have a medical diagnosis of a hearing loss. So as the school, we don't have to say that they have a disability because they are already medically diagnosed with a disability. So then a team will be created to determine whether that child needs specific services in order to access their curriculum in school. So there's a whole process that goes along with this from start to finish. And then there's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that's a federal law. So an IEP may not look exactly the same between different states and local school systems, but they may vary, but they all have to have specific things in there in order to be, in order for a child to have an IEP, we have to have specific things in that IEP.
Okay. So Ms. Tina, I have a question. So when
Mhm.
you mentioned multidisciplinary team for a parent who has a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, what could that look like?
Yeah, so I talk about it a little bit later, but I will kind of go over a little bit. So every IEP team has to have at least specific team members. So the parent, the family of the child is the most important one, because the parents and the family know the child best. So we get a lot, as an educator, we get a lot of our information about the child from the parent and from the family. So the parent is part of the team, and then for an initial IEP, to when a child is first referred, we have a psychologist on the team. The psychologist will look at different aspects of the child. And then there is a deaf and hard of hearing teacher on the team, since the child does have a hearing loss. Then there is usually it depends on the age of the child. We will also have a general education teacher on the team. So we know that the kinds of things academically that are required for a child at that age. So psychologist, deaf and hard of hearing teacher, a general education teacher, the parent. And then there's, we also have to have an administrator on the team, someone that can help us make those decisions about placement. If there are questions about placement of what kinds of classes are appropriate for that child. And then there's also it depends on the child's individual need. So because it's called an individualized education program, it all depends on what are the needs of that specific child. So there's also could be physical therapy, there could be occupational therapy. If there's vision, some vision issues, there could be vision specialists on the team. There's lots of different specialists that could be brought on board if there is a suspicion that there's other needs from that child. All right, so accommodations. So this is one checklist of many, many, many checklists that there are for accommodations for kids with hearing loss. I'm going to kind of break up the different pieces and kind of go over some of them. So just because you have this sheet doesn't mean that every child needs all of these accommodations, but these are just different accommodations, and it's a good visual representation of looking through and looking at this child and saying, okay, what does this child need in the classroom in order to be successful? So I'm going to go over kind of different sections, but this is just, like I said, there's many different different checklists out there to be looking at, but I like this one just because it really breaks it down nicely into different areas. So we're just going to look at this one, but like I said, there's many, many out there. Okay, so personal and assistive hearing technology accommodations. So the students wearing their hearing aids and cochlear implants, and there's also one called a bone anchored hearing aid, which I'm going to go over these later of what they look like and what they do, but not in great depth. But so these aren't so much an accommodation, but these are things that the child needs in order to be successful in the classroom. So we want to make sure that they're wearing their hearing aids every day. We want to make sure that they're wearing their implants every day. We want to make sure that someone is on the team that understands how to troubleshoot if they're not working, how to clean them if they're needed, how to check, how to check to make sure if those hearing instruments aren't working. And so with cochlear implants, especially, you have to check every day to make sure that the child is hearing well enough. So that a lot of the times it's the deaf and hard of hearing teacher who will help out with teaching the staff how to do that. And then also the deaf and hard of hearing teacher going in to the classroom to make sure that those devices are working properly. Then there are different FM systems. And then but we'll go over those also, what those are specifically later on. Preferential seating. So students with hearing loss, they definitely, all of my students have preferential seating. So in a normal world, when we're all in the classroom, the student needs to be typically toward the speaker, not too far away from the teacher, who is usually the main speaker. They need to make sure that they're facing the speaker. I've gone into a lot of classrooms and my students' backs are to the teacher, and that doesn't work. So we want to make sure that the student is sitting close to the speaker, facing the speaker, make sure that their back is not toward the speaker. And then also, we also need to make sure that they are facing the speaker, and then say if a student has a hearing loss in just one ear, we want to make sure that their good hearing ear is possibly towards the speaker more than the ear that they don't hear as well in. So it's all those things. So as the deaf and hard of hearing teacher, we go into the classroom, we look at the classroom makeup, we make sure we know where the teacher does most of their direct instruction. And then from that, we make sure that the child is sitting in the seat that's going to be best for them to hear everything that's going on in the classroom. So the other thing is to gain students' attention. A lot of times teachers will just ask a student a question and just say the student's name and say the question real quick. So what I make sure I teach the staff is to make sure that they know that the student is looking at them, they know that they have been called on, and then ask what they were going to ask. So you need to make sure to get their attention before you speak to them. And then reduce auditory distractions. In a classroom, especially like a kindergarten classroom, a preschool classroom, there are always auditory distractions. It's just a very noisy environment. So what I usually say is I tell teachers, I know that classrooms are noisy and that is fine, but try your best when there is real direct teaching going on to make sure that your students are as quiet as possible. So other auditory distractions can be the heater going on, the air conditioner going on. If the door is open and there's noise coming from outside the door, that could be hard for a student with a hearing loss to understand or to really pay attention to what the teacher's saying if there's all these other noises going on. The other thing is to allow processing time. So sometimes students with hearing loss, it just takes them a little bit extra time to really process what's being asked or to process what they heard. And so instead of just saying like, oh, you don't know and moving on, or sometimes you feel like you're waiting forever for an answer, but that's okay. So sometimes if you know you have a student with a hearing loss in your classroom, just give them one extra beat to see. Then if not, what you can do is repeat or rephrase information, which is also an accommodation on here. So give them an extra beat to allow the processing of what they heard. And then if they still are not answering you, try to repeat the question or rephrase the question, because maybe they're not understanding. They could have maybe not heard the question. Maybe they didn't hear the question correctly, or maybe they just didn't understand the question from how it was phrased. So if you rephrase the question, sometimes that will get the student to respond. And then we already talked about this, to face the student while speaking, and then checking for understanding. So checking for understanding is not just, do you understand? Yes. I will tell you that the majority of the time, if you ask a student with a hearing loss if they understand, they're going to say yes. Does that mean they really understood? No. So teachers will often tell me, well, they hear everything I said. And I ask them, well, how do you know they heard everything you said? And they said, well, I asked them if they understood and they shook their head yes. So that's usually not enough for our students with hearing loss. So you need to really check for understanding. So have them repeat back to you what the question was, have them repeat back to you what the instructions were. So you really need to do kind of an extra step to make sure that they really understood. It's not usually just a simple yes or no question. All right. So the next part are instructional accommodations and modifications. So there are a lot of different things that you can do for kids with hearing loss in the classroom. This is a very intensive list of them. So the one thing that we want to make sure that as much as we can, things are visual for students. So of course, students with hearing loss, they are typically more visual learners, not always, but a lot of the time. So anything you can do that's visual is going to be helpful for them. This is usually not a problem when it's in, you know, preschool, kindergarten, maybe first grade. They use a lot of visuals in their teaching to teach things. Once kids get older, it becomes less and less. However, with smart boards and technology, it's become a little bit easier for teachers, and a lot of things are shared on the board while they're teaching, which has been super helpful for my students. There's also captioning. As you can see on this presentation, there's captioning is a pretty important one for a lot of my students. So they're able to listen to the teacher and also read what the teacher is saying. Captioning on videos, we want to make sure that as many videos as possible are captioned. It's really hard for students with hearing loss in general to hear videos just on its own. So you want to make sure that if there's captioning available, that you turn that on for them. It's also my job as a teacher for deaf and hard of hearing kids to work with my students on advocating for themselves, to ask the teacher if there's captions available for the video and to please turn them on. Note taking. So students with hearing loss, it's very difficult to be listening to a lecture. Every time they look down to write a note, sometimes they miss what they said. So a lot of the times, this is something we see more in starting middle school, high school, sometimes a little bit earlier, but usually this is a middle school and high school accommodation, that by that time the student or the teachers are doing lectures, and the students are required to take notes while they're listening. A lot of the times that's just not possible for students with hearing loss. They lose a lot of information when they're looking down to write. And by the time they look up, they've missed a good chunk of what the next lecture was about. So we'll have somebody take notes for them. If they have a good friend in class that can share their notes, we do that. It depends on the situation for note taking. And then sometimes they just need a little extra time. So like I said, the processing time, sometimes they just need a little extra beat. Sometimes they just need a little extra time to take a test, sometimes to complete assignments. It depends on the student. And like I said, when I was talking about an IEP, all of these are individualized. So not all students will need extra time. I would say the majority of my students don't need extra time. They're able to complete their assignments on time, but sometimes they do. And then there's interpreting. If a student uses American Sign Language, signed English, there's also something called cute speech. If they need any interpreting services, then that's also an accommodation that's given to them. And then there's also speech to text software. And that's something we'll talk about later in this presentation. Okay, so there's lots of kind of modifications that can be done. There can be physical modifications within the classroom. So sometimes noise. So noise is number one thing that is, noise is the worst thing for a kid with a hearing loss, because any type of noise takes away from them being able to hear the speaker. So sometimes if you have those metal chairs on like a hard floor, and every time that chair moves, it makes a noise. If you have that times 28, 29, 30 kids in the classroom, it can get really noisy. So sometimes you just have to put like chairs like on the ends of the chairs. Sometimes they're tennis balls cut open. There's actual knobs that you can put on the bottom of chairs now to make them quieter. You can tie felt on the bottom of the chairs. So there's lots of different things that we can do to make sure that there's not that extra noise that isn't needed in the classroom. So for the modifications of the program, the one thing I will say is that you want to, we're really careful about modifications to the curriculum, because usually if you have to modify the curriculum too much, that may mean that the child is not in the right placement. So if they're not able to keep up with the curriculum as it was intended, with accommodations, of course. So we really want to be careful about modifying the curriculum too much. However, with that being said, there are certain things that are just necessary for kids with hearing loss. And one of those especially is vocabulary. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but vocabulary, students with hearing loss need a lot of pre-teaching of vocabulary. A lot of this needs to be directly taught. So a lot of the time students with hearing loss, they'll be taught vocabulary before the teacher starts the lesson. So say there's a new theme coming up in the classroom, then those kinds of vocabulary words that they need to learn for that theme or that project or whatever, those can be taught beforehand. That way the student with the hearing loss knows that vocabulary. So when they're learning the new theme or new project, then they won't have to worry about not knowing what all of these words mean before the project even starts. And then there's, like I said, at the very end of this, it says expanded core curriculum. So these are a lot of things that are specific to kids with hearing loss. So advocacy, so I'd say a big part of my job is to work with students on advocacy skills, self-advocacy. So we want to make sure by the time a student graduates from high school, that they are able to know about their hearing loss. They can explain their hearing loss. They can explain to people what kinds of things they need in certain situations to be successful and to access the curriculum or access their environment. So my job is to make sure that that child graduates high school knowing how to be independent and how to ask that without relying on anybody else like me or their parents. So a lot of that is just being able to explain their hearing loss and being able to explain that if they are in a college classroom, they can walk up to their teacher and say, can you make sure there's a captions on that video? It's a really hard thing for kids to learn how to do that a lot of the time. So that's something that I typically work with students for many, many years on those kinds of things to make sure that by the time they graduate high school, they're ready and they know how to do that independently.
Actually, Miss Tina, I have a question. When you mentioned pre-teach, and just as a parent as well, it does go both ways in terms of teachers being sort of pre-taught as well, especially with many families. We live in Northern California or just California in general. Families with various cultural backgrounds like to bring their traditions into the classroom, and so providing all of the cultural vocabulary to teachers is often well appreciated, because then what teachers like to do is they like to look up the words, and then, or if there is deaf and hard of hearing support, then pre-teach all of the vocabulary words to the entire class, so it's not necessarily specific to the deaf and hard of hearing child in general, but really a classroom activity so that it's more inclusive and not exclusive just to a particular child. So that's been my personal experience, but I don't know if you have anything to add to that, if that would be a good recommendation.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the times I'll get together with the teacher and we'll go over those projects and those themes and stuff. And then typically this is just one example, but if the child uses sign language, then I will go over with the teacher the signs for those words. And then a lot of times I even will do like a lesson with the class sometimes. So it depends on the child, and but a lot of the times teaching the staff also, or going over with the teacher, and if there's paraprofessionals in the classroom, as long as if they know the vocabulary also and the vocabulary we're working on, then it's a great idea to make that into a class activity and not just, like you said, pulling the student out to work on that vocabulary. I think what I meant by that also was just that sometimes they need a little extra teaching. So sometimes we will pull them out. We try not to pull them out of class unless it's really needed, because we do want them to be in the classroom with their peers and their teachers as much as possible. So if for some reason they need a little bit of extra help in those ways, then we will pull out the student just to make sure they understand those concepts. But you're absolutely right that a lot of the times we want the teacher to make this an inclusive lesson and not just for that deaf and hard of hearing child, because a lot of the times a lot of students will need help with those vocabulary words, not just the child with hearing loss. So if we can make it inclusive and include the whole class, then that's definitely the best avenue to go about. All right, then there's also testing accommodations. So a lot of times, especially for like state testing, students with hearing loss need things like closed captioning on the listening part. There's a listening component of state testing. So we want to make sure that the student isn't having to rely on their hearing to be successful in that test, so that they need closed captioning. Sometimes they need speech to text for those components. They may need a little extra time for their testing, so then they are allowed extra time. Sometimes they just need a little bit of assistance with understanding the directions. We can't expect a child to answer a question if they don't understand the question being asked. So a lot of the times we can clarify the directions for them to make sure they really understand what they're being asked, and then we let them answer the question. And then sometimes students with hearing loss, I mean, it's not, I think every child is like this, but sometimes they just need a little bit of a quiet area and without distractions, especially if we know the child takes a little bit of extra time to take a test. It's kind of testing anxiety to see everyone around you finish a test and you're the last one. So, and to reduce that anxiety for the child, sometimes we'll say, do you want to take this test in another room where it's quiet and you can just take as much time as you need? So those are different accommodations that we can write into the IEP to make sure that they're not stressed out about taking tests in the classroom. So there's also counseling is sometimes these are more special considerations, but they do happen. Sometimes there's family counseling if there's counseling that is needed for the child with hearing loss. So those are different accommodations that can be given. Family support, I wrote birth to 5. Family support can happen any age, but I know that it's a huge emphasis in early intervention and early start. I say birth to 5, which includes preschool also, but you work a lot with the families from birth to 5. And that's when the deaf and hard of hearing teacher and just the whole IEP team in general, they really work together to support the family to make sure that they're good with their child with hearing loss, and we want to make sure that we give them as much support. And so also sometimes if a child with hearing loss doesn't have a lot of peers or role models that are deaf and hard of hearing, sometimes there's organizations in the area where you live where you can be paired up with a deaf or hard of hearing peer or role model. So sometimes it's an adult role model and they can come work with the family. It's just great because a lot of times, especially if kids with hearing loss are living in more rural areas, they don't really know other deaf or hard of hearing kids. So we want to make sure that they have access to like peers. And then transition services starting in high school. Those are services that starting in high school, we want to make sure that they're really prepared for life after high school. So whether that means going to college, then we want to make sure that the student knows, which college they want to go to. Does that college have a disability resource center where they can go and ask for certain accommodations in their classes? So we want to make sure that they're like very prepared for that. And we want to make sure they're independently able to do that. Then there's also vocational rehabilitation services. So if the child, it can be college, but say a child wants to become, something more vocational like a plumber or a welder, then they can get services to help them in those kinds of programs also. All right, and then these are just kind of, since we've had a whole year now, starting today, of virtual learning. So these are just kind of accommodations that were taken from a Facebook group that I'm part of. It's not the whole list. The whole list is very long, but these are kind of just a snapshot of things that we expect teachers to be doing during virtual learning to kind of ensure that the student with hearing loss is able to access the classes during Zoom or Google Meet. So we want to make sure that teachers mute all students and try to only have one speaker at a time. It is really hard for our students with hearing loss to hear what's going on if multiple people are talking at once, or so we try to have the teacher talk as much as possible, but if students need to talk, just make sure they're doing it one at a time. To make sure that they're speaking in a clear voice, to make sure they're in a well-lit space. So the light's falling on your face and not coming from behind you. So we want to make sure that their face is visual. And then a lot of times if I tell the teachers that if a student answers a question or adds to the discussion, sometimes you just want to restate what they said so the student with hearing loss can hear the teacher's question and the answer or the student's question. So we want the teacher to repeat as much as possible so the student with a hearing loss doesn't miss the question or the answer. And then we want to make sure that they're facing the computer when they're talking. It's not helping our students with hearing loss if the teacher is not looking at the screen as they're talking. All right, so these are different amplification devices that we may see in the classroom with students with hearing loss. So these are the three most popular options, I would say. And each of these hearing aids, cochlear implants, BAHAs, there's different kinds of each of one, so they might not look exactly like this, but this is overall what it looks like. So the first one is, oops, hearing aid is here on the top left. And a lot of the times you will see this string that goes behind it. That is a clip. It clips to his shirt to make sure that if that hearing aid comes off for any reason, that it is saved by this clip and not lost, because these are very expensive. And as you can imagine, if you put a hearing aid on a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and they decide that they just don't want that hearing aid in their ear, they yank it out. And they just toss it. So instead of looking in the grass 500 times a day, this is usually saved by a clip. Doesn't always work, but for the most times I've had lots of hearing aids saved by these clips. The same goes for cochlear implants over here on the top right. So it's clipped to the shirt. So if it is taken off for any reason or falls off for any reason, it can hang by the clip. And then so the cochlear implant, I won't go into huge detail, but the cochlear implant is surgically implanted. So this part right here is a magnet, and then there's a surgical place that is surgically implanted into the other side of the head. And then this part behind his ear processes the sound. And then the hearing aid just has an ear mold that goes in the ear. And then this is the part behind the ear that processes the sound. So those are probably the two that you see most often in kids. The third one is a bone anchored hearing aid. It's hard to kind of tell, but her ear right here, there's no opening. She doesn't have an opening to her ear canal. So when a student has something like this, or for some reason they're not able to use this kind because she's not able to wear an ear mold in her ear and the sound can't go through her ear canal. So then she uses a bone anchored hearing aid, and the bone anchored hearing aid, what it is, it's through vibrations. This little piece right here vibrates and it goes through your mastoid bone, which is the bone right behind your ear. And then that sound gets processed through your ear that way, through the inner ear. Like I said, I won't go into great depth of it, but just so you know, these are three different kinds of hearing aids that you most typically will see with kids with hearing loss. So this one, the BAHA, she's wearing, it's on a headband. They do that for younger kids. As they get older, I'm trying to think the age, about 8 or 10, maybe later, there's also a surgical option for this where they can surgically implant this, but you won't see that for young kids really. It's also important to know that not all students with hearing loss will wear amplification devices. So it's depending on their hearing loss, and also sometimes it's a family decision if they don't wear a hearing aid or cochlear implant or a BAHA. If a child has a unilateral hearing loss, so just a hearing loss in one ear, sometimes it's based on family decision, or the audiologist feels it's not necessary or not needed based on their hearing loss. So that is not my decision whatsoever as a deaf educator. I go with what the family decides, what the audiologist decides, and then we go from there when we're working with a kid with hearing loss. All right, so hearing assistive technology. It's called HAT. So hearing assistive technology are devices that can help you hear in loud or busy places. So like I said, noise is the #1 enemy of kids with hearing loss. So if we can do our best to try to block out that noise, that's going to be the best way for students with hearing loss to hear better. So some hats let you see or read messages, and then you can use hats with or without hearing aids or cochlear implants. So there are many different kinds that can be used, and you may see lots of different kinds in the environment. But the three that I'm going to talk about are most commonly used in classrooms. And those are sound field speakers, personal FM systems, and then speech to text devices. So the first one is sound field speakers. So just FM, they can be called hats, they can be called FM systems. They're kind of hats kind of encompass the entire thing of things that can be used in the classroom to help with noise in the classroom. So FM systems, you'll hear a lot of things called FM systems. So one of these is is you want to make sure that the student can hear the teacher's voice above any noise happening in the classroom. And like I said, it's impossible to eliminate noise in a classroom. Kids are noisy, classrooms are noisy, the things in a classroom are noisy. It's just impossible to sit, and it's not fun if you tell a teacher you can never let the students talk. It's just not realistic. So we try to figure out, this is a way to help with all of that noise in the classroom. So the first one over here on the right is a sound field system. A lot of the times they're not mounted on the wall like this. They're usually on a stand. That way we can move it around the classroom if needed. But what this is we usually use this for students who do not use hearing aids or any amplification devices. That's usually who we use, why we would use the sound field speaker. And then the teacher is wearing a microphone around his neck right here, and I'll go over more of like what the microphone would look like in the next couple slides. This one. So this is the microphone, the newest one kind of right here. This is a touchscreen mic, so they wear it around their neck, and then the sound comes out of the sound field speaker. There's also these, it's called the Roger Pen. It's a smaller one that the student can place on their desk, which isn't the best, or they can also wear this around the teacher's neck. This is a newer one, which is a Roger Select. This is a microphone that can be magnetically placed on the shirt. And then this is what's called a pass around mic. So a lot of the times we'll have students, this is for your students to pass around if they're doing any round robin reading, if they're doing questions and answering, lots of things. So the students can pass around this mic, so the student with hearing loss is able to hear the student's answers also. So for, so there's a sound field system that goes throughout the whole classroom. The problem with that is it's not directly toward the student with hearing loss. So we also, if this child is using a hearing aid or cochlear implant or Baha, or there's also a special one that looks like a hearing aid that we can use if the child doesn't have any kind of hearing aids or cochlear implants. But for the most part, we use these with children who use amplification devices. So they're called receivers. So hearing aid, this is kind of an older one. This is the Roger X, or they can just kind of go, these are all receivers. So what happens is these receivers, the teacher wears the microphone that we saw on the one before. So the teacher will wear this, and then whatever is said by the teacher will go directly to the receiver. And then the child will hear the teacher's voice directly through their hearing aids. So this is just a better way to ensure that the student is hearing the teacher's voice clearly without the extra noise. The student can also hear what's going on in the classroom, so it doesn't block out any other students' voices or anything. It's just we know that when the child or when the teacher is talking, we know that the teacher's voice is going directly to the child with the hearing aids or cochlear implants. So these are the receivers I use for hearing or for cochlear implants. And they usually just slide on the bottom here. And then there's also one that kind of sticks out. So like I said, there's lots of variations of cochlear implants and hearing aids. So it's the job of me and the audiologist to kind of figure out which device is needed for each student, depending on their equipment. So this video is explaining kind of the need for FM systems in the classroom. And it kind of shows you the difference between what it sounds like with an FM system and without an FM system.
Guys, welcome back. Monday morning. Hope everybody had a great weekend.
For a child with hearing loss, no matter how good the technology is, they're listening through a damaged auditory system. We need to help them to hear what's happening in the classroom. If they don't hear the teacher, if they don't hear the questions and comments from other kids in the classroom, they're going to miss a significant amount of what happens, and that's not fair to them. We have to remember that classrooms are very noisy places. For a child to hear well in the classroom, we need to give them some special assistance. The first example we're going to show you today is to help you understand what a child with a hearing loss hears in the classroom with an FM system and what he would hear if we didn't turn the FM system on.
So let's get it going.
The teacher in this classroom has forgotten to put on his FM microphone. Without the microphone turned on, it's almost impossible for a child with a hearing loss to hear clearly. Let's listen to what a child with a hearing loss will hear with the FM unit turned off.
I know that we had written down at least 2 or 3 ideas each, and we had written them down in our notebooks. So if everybody remembered to bring their notebooks with them, you can reach in your...
Without an FM system on, the child is going to be hearing very muffled speech, or like they're listening from a very great distance.
We were talking about geography, and we had a...
Forgetting to turn on the FM system can happen to anybody, but don't count on the student to tell you if it's not working. Look for visual clues that he's confused, or watch the student trying to look around to see what's happening in the classroom. After a quick check, the teacher can turn on the microphone, check with the student, and make sure that all is working well.
Okay, good.
That gets the student back on track and gets the lesson going in the right direction.
We sounding okay now? Okay. So
once the FM system is turned on, the student is hearing as if the teacher was standing right next to his ear.
Generated a list of which jobs were important to know geography.
Making sure that the FM system works is the responsibility of both the teachers and the students. The students are responsible for advocating for themselves and should be encouraged to say something when the FM system either isn't working or is working poorly. As long as they can hear, they can compete. When there's only one microphone, we know the child will hear the teacher clearly, but they also need to hear the classroom discussion. If there's a pass mic, this microphone can be passed around from student to student, and then all of the students will have the opportunity to speak into the microphone, and the child with the hearing loss will hear everything they're saying. If there isn't a pass mic in the classroom, it's the teacher's responsibility to repeat what's said so that the child with the hearing loss knows what's happening. That means repeating the question if a child asks a question, or repeating what the kids say in their comments. Listen now to how other students' comments sound to a student with a hearing loss, and how disorienting it can be for a child when the teacher forgets to repeat the comments or the questions.
So who's got the next one? Who has another good idea? Aaron, what's your idea? Okay, it's funny, but that's a good one. Because you're going to be traveling a bunch of different places. You're going to have to know.
By continuing with the class and not repeating the other students' comments, the teacher quickly loses the attention of the child with a hearing loss. Let's hear again just how difficult it is for a child with a hearing loss to hear his classmates.
So let's talk about another one from someone's list on Friday that we had created. Who might have a good idea that we haven't talked about yet? Okay, Aaron, how about one from your list? Okay,
you see
that's
how
a good
important
one.
It is for the teacher to repeat the comments of other children in the classroom so that the child with a hearing loss can be a fully productive member of the class.
So Aaron just told us rock star. What do you think? Because as a rock star, you're going to be traveling to a bunch of places.
The 2 reenactments you just saw are 2 simple steps that can happen in every classroom to help children hear better. It's something that needs to be part of every educational day.
Sorry, here we go. Okay, so that kind of, I just want to make sure I'm good. Okay, so that just showed you the difference between using an FM system and not using an FM system, and how it's very important to repeat what children in the classroom said, so the student with hearing loss can hear everything that's going on. So I thought that was just a good video to see, so you can hear that the student with hearing loss really could miss a lot if the teacher is not using that FM system. So another option is a speech to text device. So students with hearing loss may prefer to use speech to text device in the classroom in order to follow what their teacher is saying, and also to ensure that they don't miss any information due to hearing their teacher well enough. There are lots of options for speech-to-text software. Live Transcribe app is an Android app that I've actually started using probably in the last year. And we can use it with an Android tablet and an external lapel microphone in the classroom. It's pretty accurate. I think the thing with speech to text is a lot of times it's not accurate, and so you really have to be careful with them. It is pretty accurate, of course, just like what's going on with the captioning in this presentation. It's going to make some mistakes, so we have to just kind of account for that. But it's a great option for students with hearing loss, so they can go back and read if they miss something, and so they can always be following along if they are worried that they're not hearing all the information. April, we can kind of turn past this video. This video just kind of shows how it works, but I wanted to be cognizant of the time.
Yes, and that's fine. And I'll include a link to the video. Okay. Everyone will receive a copy of the slides. So
okay,
actually,
perfect.
So Ms. Tina, there was a question in the chat, and it states, does the school purchase these items, or is it on the family?
Yes, so these types of items are purchased by the school district. So if it is determined that this is needed, so a lot of the times the deaf and hard of hearing teacher will work with the audiologist. Unfortunately, not every school district has an educational audiologist, so a lot of times we have to work with the private audiologists, which they're always amazing to work with, in determining that what kind of equipment is necessary in the classroom. And then as a deaf and hard of hearing teacher, I will do also kind of an evaluation in the classroom to see if that's something that would be beneficial for the student. And more times than not, it is going to be beneficial. So at that point, I put in a request for the school district to purchase those that equipment. Was there anything else about that?
No, that was the only question I saw.
Okay. Oops.
How are
now
you?
it's gonna play. Sorry. Moving on. There we go. Okay, so kind of moving on, there's a lot of text on this, and I'm just kind of gonna go over generally what this is about. I wanted to put a lot of text on these slides so people could read about it later, because it's a lot of good information and really relevant information. But I know it's a lot to put on a presentation. So a lot of the times you will see students with hearing loss display a lot of negative behaviors. And the most common reason for this is because is around language and communication. So a lot of times students with hearing loss will have language delays, communication delays. So if they are feeling like they're not able to communicate in their world, it's going to cause aggression and it's going to cause some negative behaviors. However, a lot of the times, especially when I worked in early start, we had to kind of work with 2-year-olds, and we know if a 2-year-old throws a tantrum, it's not because always they have a hearing loss and they have communication issues. Sometimes they're just throwing a tantrum and they are going through their terrible twos. So some of it is very developmentally appropriate. So we kind of need to look at the student and look at the child and say, like, okay, is this developmentally appropriate, or is this something that we really need to be working with and working through? So there's an article that I got this information from, and it just had really good information about deaf children have been reported to have higher rates of aggression, non-compliance, and inattention. And then there's also saying that they can have 2 to 3 times more behavior problems in deaf children than hearing children. And then there's also concerns about mental health problems like depression. If a child grows up feeling like they can't communicate with their family because maybe the child with hearing loss uses sign language and their families don't learn sign language, if there's that disconnect, there can be depression. So there's a lot of things that can attribute to these behaviors or these mental health issues. But a lot of it really does revolve around language and communication. It says the vast majority of deaf and hard of hearing children have hearing parents with language barriers present from the beginning. So most hearing parents are not naturally talented at visual communication, and most do not learn sign language. So unfortunately, when that happens, there is a limitation of accessible language in the home. So, so it says research has shown that deaf and hard of hearing adolescents who rated their communication with their families to be poor reported more symptoms of depression. So that's something that we really want to look out for kids with hearing loss is how are they feeling at home? How are they feeling that they communicate with their family? How do they feel like they communicate at school? Sometimes if a child with a hearing loss is in a general education class and they use sign language and an interpreter and nobody else in the classroom does, sometimes they feel isolated as well. So it's really important in the classroom for to really have a community feeling and that everybody feels included. And so there's lots of different things that you can do to make sure that your classroom environment really includes that child with a hearing loss. And then there's another thing called theory of mind. So theory of mind is understanding of how other people think and feel. And that typically will develop a little bit later in kids with hearing loss and deaf children. So those kinds of skills are needed in guiding behavior in social situations and social interactions. So if a deaf child hasn't quite developed that theory of mind yet, sometimes they're going to have issues in the social situation. So a lot of the times those kinds of social situations and social interactions and how to go back and forth, how to have a conversation, sometimes those things just need to be facilitated by an adult for sometimes, and sometimes they just need to be directly taught to this child with a hearing loss. So those are just a few things to watch out for. So for this, intervention is key. So luckily, deaf and hard of hearing services are offered to children with a hearing loss from birth to 22. So a lot of the time, most of my students graduate at high school and they move on. If a child needs more services after high school, after they turn 18, then there are programs that they can attend from 18 to 22, and they still can receive deaf and hard of hearing services, but it depends on the child at that point. Early intervention is an important part of ensuring a child with a hearing loss develops age-appropriate language and communication skills. So we really want to make sure that those language and communication skills are solid, so the child can grow up and develop and not have those behavior issues. And then the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing can assist parents, students, and school staff in understanding the complex needs of a deaf and hard of hearing student. So it's our job as a DHH teacher to make sure that everyone who's working with that child, whether it be in the home or in school, understands the needs of that child. And then this is kind of what we talked about before, but some of these services are also available. So we look at the child, the whole child, not just because they have a hearing loss. We don't just focus on what they can and can't hear so much, but we look at the whole child. And sometimes they may need speech and language services. I would say the majority of students with hearing loss will need some sort of speech and language services in their lifetime. Sometimes we need to bring in a counselor or psychologist, occupational therapist if they're fine motor. Sometimes they need a physical therapist if maybe their gross motor isn't up to par yet. So there's lots of services that are available for children depending on that child's needs, specific needs. So another issue that sometimes comes up is that deaf and hard of hearing students can often be misdiagnosed with other disabilities. So I would say number one, it's always important to know if a child has a hearing loss. So it still amazes me sometimes that I will get a child in 5th grade, 4th grade, 6th grade that has been identified with a hearing loss, and they thought they had ADHD or they thought they had autism. So, but they ended up having a hearing loss. Doesn't mean that they don't have those other disabilities, but the hearing loss can explain a lot of the things that maybe have been going on with that child. So it's important to always rule out a hearing loss before moving on with other assessments for other disabilities. So ADHD and hearing loss, some of their symptoms can be similar. So hearing loss is inattentiveness. So they may look like they're inattentive when really they're just not hearing you. So they look like they're not paying attention to you, but they're not hearing you well enough or hearing you at all. So a lot of people think that, oh, they have ADD or they have ADHD because they're not paying attention to me, since that's a similar symptom. Inappropriate responses to questions. So a lot of times you will have students with hearing loss respond with an off-the-wall statement because they thought they heard a different question, or they didn't hear the question, so they're just kind of giving you an answer that may not be related to that question. That can also be something that happens with kids with ADHD. If they're not paying attention, sometimes they'll give you an answer of a question that happened a minute before. Daydreaming. If a student with hearing loss can't hear what's going on in their world, a lot of the times they will start daydreaming. Trouble following directions can be a student with hearing loss or ADHD, and then speech problems is usually more students with hearing loss, but there have been kids with ADHD that also require some speech services. There's also autism and deafness. April, this is going to be sorry. Do you want me to go over this, or should I go to the play-based things? Because I know I'm just cognizant of the time, and I don't want to.
Right. So if I guess for the interest of participants, parent participants especially, just to touch on that and really to see, you know, how autism or at least explain Deaf Plus in terms of autism, that would help.
Okay. So autism and deafness, it definitely can co-concur. So a student with a hearing loss, a deaf student can also have autism. So they can happen together. But a lot of the times they also look similar. So we really have to, when we see a child and we may suspect they have autism, we first need to make sure that they don't have a hearing loss or vice versa. So I'm going to go, there is more of a prevalence. So the national prevalence is 1 in 150, where they think in deaf children it's 1 in 76. So it definitely does happen. And I've worked with quite a few students who have had hearing loss and autism also. So I think for this, hold on. So then these are just kind of when you have a student with a hearing loss, especially, and then if you also start noticing these red flags coming up, that these could be possible red flags of autism. So I'm just going to touch on a few of them. So students with like a lot of students who are deaf or hard of hearing, they are very much visual learners, and they will look at you when you're talking to them or signing with them. They will give you great eye contact because they want to make sure that they can see you and understand your face and look at your face and see your signs. So if you're noticing that a child who is deaf or hard of hearing isn't giving you that eye contact, or you're trying to get their attention, you're tapping on them, and they are just not replying, or they're just not giving you that visual attention, that could be a red flag. Facial expression is also a huge thing for kids with hearing loss. You will notice that kids with hearing loss, especially kids who sign, they use their facial expression for all of the grammar, usually they're very expressive. So if they have difficulty imitating those facial expressions, that can be a red flag also. Like I said, limited use of eye contact. It is a red flag if a child who is deaf or hard of hearing doesn't give you eye contact often. And then the whole thing with theory of mind, of difficulty understanding others' needs and feelings, that could just be a delay in theory of mind because they do have a hearing loss, but that could also attribute as being a red flag for autism. And then, as we know with autism, there's, they have unusual reactions to environment, sensory things. So if they have a sensory sensitivity, if the development in language, so sometimes we see a child who is deaf or hard of hearing. I had one student in the past who had amazing signing skills till about 16 months. And then all of a sudden that child stopped signing. And it was a huge red flag. And we found out in the next couple of months that yes, or I think it was within 6 to 8 months that yes, that child is deaf, but also has autism. So you want to see language development and how it's developing. Sometimes they don't play the same way as their peers, or they have an intense interest in one object or thing. And then if they, resist changes to routines or things in their environment, if they're really having a hard time with transitions, transitioning from one activity to the next, whether it be in school or in a home. So those are just things to look out for students with hearing loss for possible autism red flags. So in the community, there's also Deaf Plus or DHH Plus, and these are students who have a hearing loss, but then also have one or more additional disabilities. So Gallaudet is a college for the deaf and hard of hearing in Washington, D.C. So they did a study in 2005, so it's been a while. They found that 30 to 40% of children with hearing loss also had one or more additional disabilities. And I will say I work with quite a few students who do have additional disabilities other than a hearing loss. Some of the most common developmental disabilities that co-occur with hearing loss are intellectual disabilities, cerebral palsy, autism spectrum disorder, and then vision impairment. And then there are quite a few genetic syndromes that hearing loss is also a part of that genetic syndrome. So those are just kind of the most common ones. Okay, so I'll quickly go over, these are some play-based activities for deaf and hard of hearing kids. So the pathway to language. So I'm just gonna kind of go over these a little bit. So like I said, there's a lot of writing on here, but incidental learning. So incidental learning is what a person learns through informal communication interaction with others. So it's often done by overhearing. So as you can imagine, a deaf or hard of hearing kid is not going to overhear things like we would with normal hearing. So they're missing out. It says, this one says that as much as 90% of what a person with typical hearing learns is from incidental learning. Only 10% is learned from direct instruction. So you can imagine a child with a hearing loss, if they're missing out on 90% of this incidental learning, they're missing out on a lot of language, a lot of life lessons, a lot of things. So the one thing it says, why does the deaf or hard of hearing child throw a tantrum and refuse to get in the car? So there's this just old story about a mom throws her kid in the car like we all do as parents a lot of the time. The child has a hearing loss. They drive to the doctor, get to the doctor's office, get a shot. The child remembers that, cries, hates that, right? The next time you tell that child to get in the car, they're going to throw a huge tantrum because they think they're going to the doctor's office to get a shot. When they didn't hear, maybe 1 minute before, you're on the phone with your dad saying, hey dad, we're going to be at your house in 15 minutes. So the child isn't overhearing that phone call to know like, oh, we're not going to the doctor's office. We're going to go to grandpa's house. So that's something that as a parent or even as a teacher, we have to really remember that they're not hearing that incidental learning in their environment a lot of the time. So we really have to directly tell them. So instead of just throwing your kid in the car like we do sometimes as parents, I do that too as a parent, we really need to tell them, hey, we're going to go see grandpa. We're going to go get ice cream, or we're going to go do this, or we have to go to the doctor today. I know that's a bummer, but that's just something we have to do today. So you really want to prepare the child for what's going to happen. So they're not thinking every time they get in the car, they're going to get a shot or something terrible is going to happen. So it's just really important that those things are explicitly explained to them, or it's just a lot of a direct instruction that has to happen with a kid with a hearing loss. So language is all about language with kids with hearing loss. So they need a lot of explicit and direct teaching since they missed out on those incidental learning opportunities. So since many kids with hearing loss often display language delays, play-based activities should incorporate as much language as possible. You may think that you're going to be so tired of talking and giving them language at the end of the activity. It's going to be exhausting, but that's just kind of what needs to happen for that child. However, you want to make sure that they're using the child's preferred communication modality. So say a child's preferred communication modality is sign language. That doesn't mean that you can't incorporate spoken language into it, but you just have to make sure that you mesh the two together well. Or you just have to say like, okay, I'd really like to work on this vocabulary word, and I really think, or if they're working on speech and language, then you can work on that, but incorporate some sign too, so you are putting their communication modality in with it also. So it's always good to use the child's natural environment, and it's really good to use their daily routine to introduce vocabulary if you can, because it's something they're familiar with, they know how to do it. And then if you can just add vocabulary into those times of the day, that can happen at home or it can happen at school, because there's routines all day long for kids. And then a lot of the time, if you take something out, they're not interested in it. So kind of look at what the child's interested in, and then try to have a play-based activity based around what they're already interested in. And then let the child lead the play as much as possible, but that means as they're leading the play, you're adding in language as you're playing. Okay, so these are just examples of kind of play-based activities that you can do. So a lot of times as a parent, I've done this before as a mom, a mother wants to give her baby a juice cup or a drink or something. And what do? You put it in the cup, you give it to him, here you go. And that's it, right? There's no really language a lot, unless you want the child to ask, if the child's asking you for milk or for juice or for something, that's fine. But there's usually not a lot of language in that interaction with a kid a lot of the time. You just put it in, you give it to them, and they drink it. So this is just giving an example of you're noticing that the baby is fascinated by the condensation that's running down the outside of the cup since it's cold. So then you say, wet. Oh, your cup is wet. Or, oh, the drop is going down, down, down. So it's better than just saying, this is your cup or drink your juice. So you're adding that language in and you're looking at what the child is interested in that moment. And you're noticing, oh, they don't really care about the juice in the cup. They're looking at the condensation on the outside. Let's focus on that and talk about that instead of what's inside the cup. So it's kind of looking at things in a different way a lot of the times. And it's kind of looking at not just what you want to talk about as an adult, which a lot of times we want to control the situation, and really letting the child kind of control the situation in a way. So the next one is just kind of having tea. So if the child says Dolly tea, you could say the Dolly's drinking tea. That one is having a sandwich. The child says sandwich. Then you expand, sandwich. What's it got in it? Jam, a jam sandwich. So everything, it's called input plus one. The child is giving you this, you give it one above. The child is giving you this, you give it input a little bit more. So you're always trying to build on what that child is saying. The more and more and more that that child hears that, the more you're going to get from that child. All right, so these are just other examples of things that you can do. So shared focus, it's things that you can do together. So a lot of the times shopping. You can, if you're going to take, everybody has to go shopping with their kids, even though it's not always a fun activity to do with your kids, but it's something that has to be done. So you can talk about things on the shelves. You can give them their own shopping list if they're old enough. Go have them, rate them a list of apples, bananas, whatever, and they have to go look for things, and then you talk about it. They bring back the fruit or bring back the food, and then they tell you something about it. Reading books, it's always, every teacher is going to tell you to read. That you look at the pictures, you can do a picture walk first. You don't even have to read the book some of the times. You can just look at the pictures and just talk about the pictures in the book. So sometimes those books are very long with their words that are on the book. Sometimes don't even pay attention to the words. Talk about what's happening in the pictures. And that is going to develop really good natural language. Cooking, I know sometimes it's a messy thing, but if you cook together, cooking together is a great activity because they can follow a recipe, which is sequencing skills, as this says. You can have them go get something. So, do they know what an egg is? Great. Have them go get an egg and you know that they know that. So it's kind of figuring out what they know and then helping them, they're helping you make something. And then toys, you can have a teapot party with your dolls. You can set them all around. You can talk about what they're doing, who they are. You can talk about what they look like. So you can add language in all aspects of your day. So these are just a couple more examples. So on the left here is a fireman activity. This one's a race car driver activity. Excuse me real quick, sorry. So this is just telling you that these are all the words that you could use in this one activity. There's nouns, there's verbs, there's adjectives, there's prepositions. You could turn take, you could shared focus. So all you're doing is just pretending. You could let the son be the chief fireman. He's giving you orders. So it's a lot of things that a lot of language that's in a very short and easy activity that you don't really need a lot of stuff. You could make up anything for this. It's a lot of pretend play. Anytime you can do pretend play with your children, that's the way you're going to facilitate a lot of language out of your child, is by doing pretend play. And then the other one is a race car driver. You just put two chairs together and you pretend that you're driving. And then there's just all these words that you can have in that, and you can take turns and they can drive, then you can drive. There's just a lot of things that you can do with just that very simple activity. Okay, so these are just 3 activities, just websites that I posted for activities for home. I have them up here, but I think for the sake of time, I will let you guys check those out. They're just, some of them are similar activities to what I just was talking about. Then other ones are just more, this one, the Clark School one, it's a whole PDF and it has it broken down into different sections. They're not all play-based activities, but some of them are really good ideas of just different kinds. I'll show you. Oops, sorry. Oh no, I can't get it. It's okay. Let's see if it will go. There it goes. So this is 101 ideas for families with infants who are deaf and hard of hearing. So this is for younger kids, but not all of it is for younger kids. So it has different categories in it. So social emotional, auditory perception. Then it talks about deafness and development. And then there's all these early communication. So it just has really good, and it's broken down into very short and easy reading things, which I liked about it. So this is just kind of a helpful thing to read about kids with hearing loss and things to look for. And then they also have some good ideas for activities that you can do with kids with hearing loss. All right, and those are my references. All right, April, did we want to do, oops, sorry. Do you want that back up or it should be fine, right?
If you want to continue sharing, that's fine, but I just wanted to open it up to attendees and participants here. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and or type in the chat. But I also want to thank Ms. Tina for providing a comprehensive, there's a lot of information, and to be able to, condense it within an hour it's a feat, because
Yeah.
just for myself, being a parent as well as of a child who's deaf and hard of hearing, it's quite the journey from, and my child was diagnosed earlier, so I started the process. So a lot of what you talked about, I do resonate with. And but I also know that families who might be listening will have a lot of questions. So I encourage you, if not now, then feel free to email me. I can, and if you're okay with it, if there are questions after this presentation, and if you are willing to answer, I can provide the answers to those in a follow-up email.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but again, thank you for your time. I don't see any questions currently in the chat.
Okay.
But I do want to thank everyone for attending. A copy of Ms. Tina's presentation and all of the links should be clickable, and the video should be playable. Well, they'll be sent to everyone who registered through Eventbrite, and if you didn't, I will provide my email address again so that you can email me. Okay. And do you have any, so I know this was more, Ms. Tina, you had a slide on virtual learning, and I know that I'm kind of throwing this out unexpectedly, but is there any sort of recommendation or guidance for, especially when a lot of families who have deaf and hard of hearing children, whether it's in school or in the home, face mask recommendations? Because you did talk about, visual, face-to-face, and I'm assuming that includes lip reading. So anything out there that's been developed? Do you have any?
You mean more like the
Yeah.
masks and all that stuff?
Yes, yes.
Ugh. So I will tell you, I know that's a hard one. There's a lot out there. I can tell you that for face masks with the window on it. However, I think we're all kind of still deciding what would work best, because a lot of those face masks with the plastic window, it really reduces the ability to hear spoken language clearly, which is not helpful at all. So I will tell you, I was talking to April at the beginning, one of my school districts is going back soon. So I'm kind of doing this kind of testing out of different things. They have to wear a mask. That's number one. They have to wear a mask. So we're trying out the clear one. There's not really one in particular that I have found to be the best, to be honest, sadly. We're also trying out just the clear face mask with the FM microphone. If that's not great, then we're just going to do a regular mask with a microphone to see for the FM system to see if that's clear. So it's really at this point, I would say it's a lot of trial and error right now. I wish I had it. This is something that keeps me up at night. I will tell you that it makes me very anxious to go back with all of these extra PPE things that have to happen. So I am just going to have to try it out. And if we find something that works, I will let you know because and every student is different. Some students don't even use FM systems. Some students don't use any hearing aids or cochlear implants or anything. So we're really trying to make sure, number one, it's going to make sure that they are close to the teacher. That's going to be number one, as close as they can be to the teacher. That's going to be the first one when we all go back. Other than that, we are going to try to figure out what's the best way to do this with all of that extra protection that we need for everyone's sake. We need to do it, but it's just really difficult.
All right, again, thank you for a wonderful presentation. It was, I learned a lot as always. And thank you for those who are attending late this afternoon. And I hope everyone has a great day. Again, feel free to email me with any questions. And Ms. Tina, if I do receive questions, I'll forward them to you. But again,
Right.
Have a great evening, everyone. Have a great week. Stay safe and take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.